The mockery sliced through the air of the training ground, but Diana Walsh never loosened her grip, never let her eyes waver. She was simply adjusting the mortar tube. At least, that's what they thought. Then, Major Harrison's command cut through the air like a gunshot. "Stop! Remove your jacket!" Fabric rustled. Light struck metal. The hidden metal gleamed on her chest. Laughter crumbled into silence. Cadets froze, eyes widening, not understanding what they'd just witnessed. And as the training ground held its breath, an alarm siren wailed in the distance. What would happen next would turn these exercises into something no one expected. Before continuing this story, please comment below with your city or country where you're watching from. Your feedback inspires us to do better. The midday heat pressed down on Camp Ironhold's training ground, turning the packed earth into something that shimmered like metal underfoot. Dust hung in the air with every step the cadets took, clinging to sweat-soaked uniforms and stinging eyes. Instructors' commands bounced off the surrounding ridges. But among the shouts, one figure knelt silently at the edge of a mortar pit. Diana Walsh crouched on one knee, both hands gripping the long steel tube planted in the earth. Her body leaned slightly forward, assuming the brace position as she'd been taught in basic training. Around her, the rest of the squad watched impatiently, shifting from foot to foot, muttering, "Look at her, that's all she does. Aims and acts like it matters." A contemptuous sneer cut through the crowd. "Mortar girl, that's what she is, nothing else." Laughter followed, sharp and brittle. Boots scraped in the dirt as several cadets moved closer, their grins wide, hungry for the reaction they calculated to provoke. But Diana didn't look up. Her palms pressed against the cold iron, fingertips finding familiar grooves. She adjusted the base plate by a fraction of an inch, angled the barrel toward the horizon, and breathed slowly. Another voice joined the mockery, higher, derisive. "Careful there. Wouldn't want our precious tube keeper to break a nail." More laughter. Someone's hand threw pebbles into the pit where she crouched. And still, her gaze never wavered. The weapon before her demanded precision, demanded calm. She gave it both, as if the taunts behind her belonged to some distant world. The instructor didn't intervene. Major Rowan Harrison stood with arms crossed, a shadow against the glare, eyes narrowed on Diana. To the cadets, he seemed indifferent, almost absent. But in his mind, something stirred. He'd seen hundreds of trainees who froze under mockery, stumbled when the crowd turned cruel. This one didn't freeze. She was composed, as if the noise was wind passing over stone. Her movements with the mortar were deliberate, precise. Too precise for someone who supposedly had so little experience. "Just aims the tube," another voice scoffed. "What a career." The mockery rolled again. But Harrison caught what they missed. The way Diana's jaw tightened, the rhythm of her breathing, measured like a metronome. He'd fought enough to recognize discipline born of necessity, not classroom drilling. From where Diana knelt, the world narrowed to the ring of metal and the horizon beyond it. She adjusted the legs of the bipod, anchoring them deeper, letting the weight settle in movement. Her mind cataloged wind direction, ground slope, the faint vibration under her knees from distant artillery practice. All processed in silence. Then a sudden dull thud. A nearby crew's misfire hit the ground too close, raising a cloud of sand and choking smoke. A cadet screamed, jerking back. Someone cursed, others laughed nervously. But Diana simply reached out, steadied her weapon, and moved it slightly away from the debris. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. Harrison's eyes sharpened. Most would have jerked in panic. She moved not like a frightened rookie. She shifted with the precision of someone who knew exactly what to do to maintain control. The noise quickly subsided, the misfire was contained, but an uneasy quiet lingered. Diana's hands, stained with earth, gripped the tube one last time before she leaned back, waiting. "Pathetic," a cadet muttered behind her. "She acts like this is real service." The insult might have carried further if not for Harrison's sudden step forward. His boots hit the ground like hammers. Laughter instantly died. At first he said nothing, only studied the woman crouched by the weapon, his face unreadable. Diana slowly rose, brushing dust from her sleeve. Her eyes slid up just once, long enough to meet his gaze, a current of recognition. Or was it challenge? Flickered in that instant. Then her gaze dropped again. Harrison's stare lingered. He noticed something glinting when she adjusted her jacket. A faint flash beneath the fabric folds on her chest. His brow furrowed, a knot formed in his stomach. She pulled the fabric tighter, but the moment had already burned into his vision. Not a button, not a badge, but something heavier, sharper. He'd seen medals in his years, awards, marks of valor. This didn't look like any of them. The cadets hadn't noticed, distracted by their own whispers, but Harrison had, and once seen, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He moved closer, voice quiet but firm. "Stop." The chatter died, heads turned. Harrison's tone cut through the humid air, cold and commanding. "Remove your jacket." For the first time all day, Diana hesitated. Not long, just enough for the silence to deepen. Her hand froze on the seam of her uniform. Around her, the cadets tensed, curiosity blooming in the sudden quiet. The fabric shifted, heavy and reluctant. The outer layer slowly slipped from her shoulders, inch by inch. Dust clung to the cloth as it slid. Then, caught by sunlight, the gleam returned. This time unmistakable. A medal. Not the usual bronze circles pinned to parade soldiers' chests, not the colored ribbons handed out at ceremonies. This was older, darker, its edges engraved with symbols few here had ever seen. The laughter that had filled the air minutes ago withered, as if the earth had swallowed it. Cadets gaped, their voices gone. Eyes darted from the medal to Harrison's face, seeking a clue, a reaction. Harrison's jaw clenched. He knew enough to recognize what shouldn't exist. His breath caught, though he masked it with a cough. Diana didn't look at them. She adjusted the mortar tube again, calm as ever, as if the secret insignia on her chest carried no weight. In this suspended silence, the only sound came from wind rustling through the dirt, carrying with it the faint taste of smoke from distant exercises. And then, like a knife cutting the moment in half, a siren wailed across the camp. Cadets jerked, turning toward the source. The siren's wail echoed off the walls, insistent, relentless. What had begun as simple training exercises now trembled on the edge of something entirely different. Harrison's eyes never left Diana. She slowly straightened, dust on her hands, the metal catching sunlight once more before disappearing under fabric. She was simply adjusting the mortar tube, but in that moment, every man and woman on that field knew. Nothing here was as simple as it seemed. The siren wailed over Camp Ironhold, a shriek so sharp it cut through every stray thought. Cadets who had been laughing seconds earlier now paled, stumbling as they looked toward the horizon. The siren's tone wasn't the usual training cadence. It carried a pitch that rattled bones, a signal meant for danger, not rehearsal. Boots thundered across the ground as instructors shouted over the noise, gathering trainees into rough formation. But order immediately crumbled. From the edge of the field, a black column of smoke spiraled upward, thick and acrid, marking the sky with the promise of fire. It rose from the warehouses where training ammunition was stored. One of the junior soldiers dropped his pack and muttered, "This isn't scheduled. This is real." His words scattered like sparks in dry grass. Fear multiplied. In the midst of all this, Diana Walsh stood beside her mortar tube, the metal hidden again under her jacket. Her breathing slowed, didn't quicken, expression unreadable. She scanned the chaos. Cadets scattering, instructors trying to restore order, fire climbing ever higher. Her jaw tightened, and then she moved. She didn't wait for permission. She surged forward, voice rising clear and commanding, cutting through the panic. "Form up on me. Keep the line tight. We control this ground, or the flames consume it." The pure force of her tone made several cadets move. They looked at each other, torn between the instinct to run and the authority threading through her words. In the absence of confidence from their instructors, they chose her. Diana led them toward the smoke. Heat washed over them as they approached. The crackle of igniting wood escalated to a roar. One warehouse door had already collapsed, scattering sparks into the dirt. Ammunition crates stacked inside popped like firecrackers as the heat crept closer. Grab sandbags. Build a barrier here, she barked, pointing to a path where flames could spread to the training field. Her commands carried the weight of experience. And though most had never taken her seriously before, now they obeyed without question. Hands dug into earth, hauling heavy bags, throwing them into rows. Diana bent down, dragging one herself, muscles straining. Hair clung damply to her temples, but her eyes never left the growing line of fire. Major Harrison pushed through the crowd, shouting his own orders. Fall back! This area is compromised. But the cadets were already moving under Diana's direction. Their fear had shifted to urgency. He stopped cold, watching her guide them with precision no textbook could teach. Another explosion rolled from the warehouse, shaking the ground. A crate split, scattering fragments across the dirt. Diana shielded her face, then turned to the nearest cluster of soldiers. Stay low, keep your heads down and keep moving. They did. The line of cadets tightened, forming a crude wall of sand and stone. Sweat poured down their faces, but there was strange energy among them. No longer panic, but focus, borrowed from the steadiness in her stance. Harrison's jaw clenched tight. He wanted to pull her out, assert his rank, but couldn't deny the results unfolding before him. Under her guidance, a once disorganized mass of trainees had found direction. Another warehouse caught fire, a plume of flames spiraling into the sky. Diana's gaze flicked to the wind, measuring its push. She grabbed a signal flare from a supply box at her feet, snapped it to life, and hurled it into the dirt between the fire and the cadets. Red smoke bloomed, thick and billowing, drifting across the line like a curtain. "This is our shield," she shouted. "Stay behind it. Keep laying bags." The crimson haze enveloped them, cutting visibility but blocking the worst heat. Cadets coughed but held their position, sandbags thudding into place. On the other side of the smoke, instructors finally rallied, dragging hoses and shouting into radios. But the first wall was built, and that was Diana's doing. Harrison stepped into the haze, his silhouette stark against the fire's glow. He stopped a pace from her. "Walsh, what the hell are you doing?" Her response was clipped, sharp. "Saving your camp." For a moment, their eyes met through the curtain of smoke. He saw no fear in her gaze, only determination sharpened by something deeper than ordinary training. Behind them, flames crackled louder, devouring timber. Cadets doubled their efforts, inspired by the woman who minutes ago had been merely a target for mockery. Then came a shout from the far side of the training ground. "Fire's reaching the second row of warehouses." Diana spun toward the voice, boots cutting into dirt. She raised her hand, gathering the nearest. "Split the line. Half with me, half hold the wall, move." They obeyed instantly. She surged forward, a wedge of cadets following into the smoke. Their shadows flickered in the orange light as they dragged hoses and overturned barrels to smother sparks, jumping across the grass. Harrison followed slower, torn by contradictions. Every instinct screamed that she'd overstepped boundaries, but the evidence was undeniable. Without her, the field would already be consumed. A sudden gust drove embers across the ground, scattering like stars. Diana dropped, rolling a sandbag over the nearest patch, stomping it out. Her shoulders heaved, but she rose again, voice steady. "Don't let it jump. Cut it off here." Cadets mimicked her, stomping and smothering until the embers hissed into silence. For a moment, hope flared, but then the biggest explosion yet thundered from the first warehouse, a booming crack that sent a shockwave across the field. Cadets hit the ground. Diana staggered but remained standing, shielding a young soldier behind her. Smoke tore apart in the blast, exposing chaos in harsh light. Fire raged without control, supplies collapsed, and the line of trainees stretched thin. Harrison's jaw hardened. He barked into his radio, demanding reinforcements, but knew they wouldn't arrive in time to change the situation. His eyes returned to Diana. Her face was streaked with ash, hands raw from hauling sandbags, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't a case of composure. This was muscle memory, reflexes of someone who'd lived in fire before. He remembered that flash under her jacket, the metal that caught sunlight. His mind connected pieces he'd wanted to ignore. Diana shouted again, voice hoarse but fierce. "Hold your positions. The wall holds or the camp falls." The words rang not just with desperation. They carried conviction, the kind that makes people stand when every instinct tells them to run. Cadets rose, coughing, eyes burning, but they lifted sandbags, pulled hoses, fought as if their lives depended on it. Because now they did. The fire line wavered, slowed. The smoke screen thickened as more flares were lit, spreading color through the choking air. Against all odds, chaos bent into something resembling order, and Harrison, standing in the heart of it, felt the weight of revelation pressing down on him. Diana Walsh was not what she seemed. She led like a veteran officer, not a cadet. And the truth hidden under her uniform threatened to ignite flames even fiercer than those consuming the warehouses. The siren still wailed. Flames still clawed at the sky. But in that moment, the entire camp seemed balanced on a knife's edge between ruin and survival, between lies and truth that refused to stay buried. And Diana stood at the center of it all, the so-called Mortar girl, commanding through smoke and fire as if the battlefield had always been hers. The roar of the last explosion rolled over Camp Ironhold, echoing like thunder trapped in the ridges. Dirt still rained on helmets and shoulders. Cadets coughed in the haze, their lungs rasping as they tried to stay low. The wall of smoke from Diana's signal flares rippled in the wind, painting everything in deep crimson. It seemed the sky itself was painted with warning. Diana's voice cut through the choking air again, leading her improvised line forward. "Reinforce the barrier. Keep the breach sealed." Her throat was raw, but the tone carried weight that pressed people to action. They obeyed her without question. Gone now were the mockeries, the taunts. Every eye that found her face carried urgency, even respect. Major Harrison stood several yards behind, boots grinding dirt into earth, hands rigid at his sides. He was a man accustomed to control, to commanding every moving part of a training exercise. But here, chaos bent to a different center of gravity, and it wasn't him. Cadets listened to her, not his shouts, and worse, she was making it work. Flames clung to the second row of warehouses, fire spitting sparks across packed dirt. Every ember threatened to catch fabric or wood. Diana barked quick orders, sending half her line forward with buckets of water while others remained anchored to the sandbag wall. She moved among them, pulling her own weight, sweat carving tracks through soot-covered skin. Her movements were efficient, nothing wasted. One cadet stumbled under a heavy load, nearly falling. Diana caught his arm, pulled him up, and pushed him back to the line with a firm nod. "You're fine. Keep moving." The boy's eyes widened, as if struck by her steadiness. Then he tightened his grip and ran on. Harrison gritted his teeth. He wanted to pull her out, strip her of command, remind everyone about chain of authority. But every second that passed without her would mean another breach in their defense. He acknowledged the truth, even if he hated it. The camp was holding because of her. Fire crackled again, bringing down another warehouse wall. A blast of heat hit them like a wave. Diana ducked, eyes narrowed, then barked, "Shift the line left. Don't let it spread." Her instincts were flawless, too flawless. Harrison's stomach twisted as memory of that metal flashed again in his mind. This wasn't luck. This wasn't improvisation. She was drawing from a past none of these cadets could understand. From the far side of the training ground came the sound of engines and squealing brakes. Reinforcement teams poured in, dragging hoses, axes, and chemical extinguishers. Official help had finally arrived, and tension on the field shifted. But even as they charged into the flames, their eyes fell on Diana, noting her stance, how she directed bodies into place as if she were one of their own officers. "Who's in charge here?" a firefighter shouted through his mask. Harrison should have answered. Instead, Diana pointed, showing weak spots in the fire line, rattling off precise instructions. The firefighter didn't hesitate. He rushed where she directed, his team following. This was the moment Harrison felt the ground tilt. A private, just a cadet, was now directing trained professionals in the midst of an emergency, and none of them questioned her. The effort dragged on, an exhausting battle against an enemy that refused to die. Buckets emptied, hoses hissed, sandbags thudded into place until the line tightened. Hour by hour, flames compressed, beaten back from the warehouses into smoldering heaps. The siren still wailed, but the pitch softened as control slowly returned. Finally, the smoke thinned enough to expose the field again. Cadets leaned on shovels, buckets, and each other, chests heaving. Fire no longer threatened to consume the camp. The worst had passed. But Harrison's gaze wasn't on the charred ground. It was on Diana. She stood at the front of the exhausted line, shoulders squared, streaks of soot across her face. She looked less like a trainee than a commander surveying the aftermath of battle. And when she exhaled, the weight in that breath wasn't relief. It was recognition, as if she'd stood in this place many times before. Cadets began muttering. Words of awe spread where once there had been contempt. Several patted her shoulder as they passed, their eyes lingering on her in ways they never had before. The mocking nickname Mortar Girl vanished from their lips, replaced by silence colored with reverence. Harrison stepped forward, his presence drawing attention back to him. He stopped just a pace from Diana, close enough to see ash clinging to her eyelashes. His voice was quiet but iron firm. "My office." "Now." Cadets exchanged glances, uncertain. Diana didn't argue. She simply gave one last instruction to the nearest soldier. "Check the wall. Make sure there are no gaps." And followed Harrison without hesitation. The two disappeared from the smoke-covered yard. Cadets remained behind, whispering, their curiosity building like pressure in a sealed chamber. Inside the command post, air was cooler, filtered, carrying none of the smoke that choked the training yard. Harrison closed the door behind them with a click. The silence that followed was heavy, vibrating with unspoken questions. Diana stood at attention without being commanded, her uniform dirty but her bearing unwavering. Harrison slowly circled her, his eyes scanning every detail. Finally, he stopped in front of her, arms crossed. "You're going to explain, right now." Her expression didn't change. "Explain what, sir?" His voice dropped almost to a growl. "Don't play dumb. You commanded out there like a field officer. You handled that fire like a combat operation. And then there's this." He jabbed a finger at her chest, where the metal had gleamed earlier. "I saw it. That insignia doesn't exist. Not officially. Not anymore." Her eyes flickered just for an instant. She drew a breath, held it, then released. "You're mistaken." "Don't insult me," Harrison snapped. "I've served long enough to recognize what I saw. That symbol belonged to a unit that was erased from records years ago. The Phantom Legion." The name hung between them. Heavy, forbidden. Diana's silence was confirmation enough. Harrison moved closer. "Who are you, Walsh? And how the hell did you end up here, hiding in plain sight?" Her jaw tightened, but she still didn't speak. Silence stretched until Harrison slammed his hand on the table between them. The crack echoed through the room. "You owe me the truth, because right now my cadets follow you more than me. And if that's going to continue, I need to know why." Diana slowly raised her chin. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "I didn't come here to lead. I came here to disappear. That's all." Her words fell like stones thrown into water, rippling through Harrison's consciousness. Disappear. Soldiers didn't fade into anonymity by accident, especially those who wore medals that were buried with classified files. He studied her, looking for cracks in her composure. Instead, he found only resolve, tired, hardened, but unbreakable. Finally, he exhaled sharply and stepped back. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. You may think you can hide in the ranks, but after today everyone saw what you're capable of. And I'm not the only one who noticed." Outside, the camp still buzzed with recovery. Engines growled, hoses hissed, and cadets whispered about the woman who'd turned chaos into order. Inside, Harrison's office felt like a chamber of secrets, the weight of revelation pressing down on both of them. Diana didn't respond. She stood silently, shoulders straight, eyes forward, the soldier's mask firmly in place. But beneath that silence was a spark of something dangerous. The past was clawing its way back to the surface, whether she wanted it or not. And Harrison knew. The fire outside was extinguished, but another flame had ignited here, one that no amount of water could put out. The camp quieted, but only on the surface. Ash still drifted on the wind, carrying the faint smell of burned wood and charred paint. Outside, cadets moved in subdued clusters, repairing the scorched ground, their voices low, restless. They kept glancing toward the command post where Diana Walsh had disappeared with Major Harrison. Rumors already swirled, half-whispered stories about how she'd held the line when flames broke through, about the strange insignia that had flashed once on her chest before disappearing again. Inside the office, tension hadn't eased. It had grown sharper, more compact, filling the corners of the room. Harrison leaned against his desk, arms crossed, eyes never leaving Diana. She stood as if carved from stone, hands at her sides, uniform streaked with soot, but her bearing unchanged. The silence stretched, neither willing to easily surrender the next word. Finally, Harrison spoke, his voice lower than before, deliberate. "You said you came here to disappear. That doesn't happen by accident. People don't stumble into a place like this with a past carved on their chest." He tapped his finger on the desk, as if each word was a nail being hammered into place. "So I'll ask again. Who are you really?" Diana's gaze lifted, meeting his with calm defiance. For a long moment it seemed she might refuse again, but the question hung too heavily between them, and finally she exhaled, her shoulders softening a fraction. "I was part of something that no longer exists, an assignment buried so deep it might as well be erased. That metal? It's not supposed to see daylight. Not here, not anywhere." Harrison's jaw clenched. "The Phantom Legion." He said it like a curse, each syllable sharpened with disbelief. Her silence confirmed it clearer than words. He pushed off from the desk and slowly circled her. "I read the files. What little wasn't redacted. Your unit was trained for operations no one would ever acknowledge. You shouldn't be standing in my camp wearing a cadet's patch, pretending to be just another green soldier. So why are you here?" Diana's eyes drifted down, as if weighing what she dared reveal. "Because sometimes survival means disappearing. I thought if I blended in, didn't stand out, I could live quietly. But today," she trailed off, memory of flames and chaos filling the gap. Harrison pressed, "Today you showed them all that you're more than this. You can't hide anymore. The cadets follow you now. They're already talking." Outside, muffled laughter and whispers seeped through the walls. Every voice now carried her name, reshaping it with reverence instead of mockery. Diana briefly closed her eyes, hearing it too. When she opened them, resolve had returned. "Then let them talk. I'll keep doing my job. That's all I came to do." Harrison slowly shook his head. "No, you can't just bury this. That fire was one thing, but if word spreads about what you're wearing, this camp becomes something entirely different. Questions will come from above, and we both know what happens when command catches the scent of something they've buried." Diana's hands slightly clenched into fists at her sides. She knew. She'd lived it before. The door suddenly burst open. A figure entered without knocking. Lieutenant Kellner, his face still streaked with dirt from the fire, eyes sharp with recognition. He froze seeing Diana standing there. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Kellner's voice cracked the silence, rough and certain. "It's her." His eyes locked on the spot where the metal had been. His breathing quickened. "That insignia." No mistake. The Phantom Legion. Harrison's gaze snapped to him. "Enough, Kellner." But Kellner's stare never left Diana. His hands trembled slightly as memories washed over him, dragging ghosts into the room. "I saw that emblem once before. Years ago. A briefing I wasn't supposed to attend. They said the unit was destroyed. To the last person." His voice broke. "And yet here you stand." Diana didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady. "You should forget what you think you know." Kellner laughed harshly, disbelief etched on his features. "Forget? How do you forget seeing a ghost walk into your camp?" "They'll want answers, Harrison. You can't hide this. The Major's hand slammed the table again, silencing him. Get out of here. But Kellner lingered another moment, eyes burning into Diana. The Legion isn't dead, he whispered, half in awe, half in fear. And if she's here, then nothing we thought was buried stayed buried. Then he turned and rushed out, the door slamming behind him. The office fell silent again, but damage had been done. Harrison's face was carved in grim lines. Diana stood motionless, though inside her thoughts raced. If Kellner recognized her, others might too. The cover she'd clung to was unraveling faster than she could repair it. Harrison exhaled heavily. This is spiraling out of control. If Kellner runs his mouth, command will come down on us. And when they do, they won't just ask questions. They'll drag you back to whatever hole they pulled you from. Diana's eyes hardened. Then I'll do what I've always done. Adapt. Survive. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're not making this easy for any of us. Outside, footsteps thundered as cadets moved to new tasks, but their voices rose now with a different tone. Diana could hear it. Fragments of her name, spoken with respect, even reverence. The sound cut her deeper than insults ever had. She turned back to Harrison. You said I can't hide anymore. Maybe you're right. But that doesn't mean I have to let them own me again. His eyes narrowed. You think you can fight both camp rumors and the weight of classified history? That metal alone could topple your cover. Her lips pressed into a thin line. It's just metal. What matters is what I choose now. The conversation ended there, heavy with unfinished edges. Harrison moved to the window, looking out at cadets gathered in the yard, their faces still lit by reflection of fire, even though the flames had died. Diana remained rigid, a figure of quiet defiance in the middle of his office. For the first time since the siren sounded, the Major felt something colder than smoke surrounding his thoughts. The realization that the true fire was only beginning. Diana Walsh was no longer invisible. She was a spark thrown into dry tinder, and the camp around her was already beginning to burn in ways no hose or sandbag could control. And outside, whispers carried her name like a banner, growing louder with each passing minute. The camp didn't sleep that night, though flames were smothered and the sirens silenced. Long after the last hose was coiled, conversations buzzed in muted corners. Cadets gathered in small circles, replaying every command they'd heard shouted during the fire. Her name slipped through lips with newfound weight. Diana Walsh. No longer just the quiet one crouched by the mortar tube. She'd become a question mark in the heart of Camp Ironhold. At dawn, the yard bore scars of flame. Charred beams lay twisted like blackened bones. The smell of smoke still clung to the air. Soldiers moved through the ruins with shovels and tools, their chatter subdued but persistent. Now and then, one of them cast a glance toward the barracks where Diana had retreated, their eyes full of something between admiration and concern. Inside, Diana sat on her bunk, hands folded loosely between her knees. Her uniform, hastily cleaned, still carried faint stains around the cuffs. Cadets stole quick looks, whispering behind cupped hands. She could feel their stares even without meeting their eyes. Some held curiosity, others suspicion, but all of them had changed. They no longer dismissed her. They waited, as if expecting her to act again when the next crisis struck. Harrison entered the barracks without warning. His presence cut conversation short like a blade slicing fabric. His gaze swept the room once before settling on her. Outside, he ordered, voice flat. Diana stood without a word. Cadets parted for her as she followed him into the morning air. The camp stretched quietly before them, rising sun-bleeding pale light over the smoking ruins. Harrison stopped beside the edge of the parade ground. His hands rested on his hips, jaw rigid. Kellner already filed a report. He claims he saw the insignia himself. I shut him down, but it won't hold. Someone higher up will come sniffing around. Diana's expression didn't waver. Then let them come. That's not an option, Harrison snapped. You don't understand. The Phantom Legion isn't a name you throw around lightly. It was erased for a reason, and if they believe one of its ghosts has risen, they'll tear this place apart to confirm it. Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. So what's your plan, Major? Hide me? Turn me in? His silence said enough. Tension hung until voices drifted across the yard. A group of cadets jogged past, saluting when they caught Harrison's eye, but their gazes slid to Diana, lingering, full of questions they didn't dare voice aloud. One of them muttered too quietly for the Major to catch, but clear enough for her. Legion. The word struck like a spark in dry grass. She felt it spreading, racing on whispers, weaving itself into the very air of the camp. Later that day, Harrison gathered the cadets in the charred yard. Ground was blackened, sky clear. He addressed them with his usual authority, outlining steps for rebuilding and discipline. But throughout his speech, Diana noticed how their attention drifted not away, but toward her. Every pause seemed to pull their eyes in her direction, as if they waited for her to speak instead of him. When he dismissed them, two young soldiers lingered. One, still shaken from the fire, approached her directly. "Walsh," he said, his voice now respectful. "Back there. How did you know what to do? No one else could command like that." Diana met his eyes evenly. "You don't need to know how. You just need to remember that you held your position." The boy nodded quickly, as if accepting a lesson before hurrying away. His companion whispered something excitedly as they disappeared. Diana knew the story would grow taller with each retelling. That evening, officers gathered in the strategy tent. Atmosphere churned with unease. Maps of the camp lay pinned to tables, dotted with notes about the fire, but conversation kept drifting back to her name. Harrison stood at the head, trying to redirect them, but suspicion was alive in the room. "She took command," one captain said. "Cadets followed her, not us. That's not normal." "She's wearing something," Kellner added sharply, his eyes flicking to Harrison. "I saw it." "I know what I saw." Harrison's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, another officer leaned forward. "Then what's she doing here, disguised as a cadet? Either she's lying to all of us, or someone higher up planted her for reasons we weren't told." Debate swelled, accusations circling like vultures. Harrison finally slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. She saved your camp yesterday. Without her, you'd be digging graves right now. Whatever she is, she's here now, and until I get orders otherwise, she's under my command. Clear?" The room fell into uneasy silence. No one spoke further, but their eyes carried doubt that wouldn't be silenced by his words alone. Meanwhile, Diana sat alone outside the tent, listening to muffled arguments through canvas. Her shoulders tensed with each fragment she caught. Legion, metal, planted. Ghosts she'd tried to bury were clawing their way into the open. When dusk fell, a messenger arrived. Dust covered his boots, his uniform stiff from the road. He carried a sealed envelope marked with Central Command's insignia. Harrison broke the seal privately, scanning the page, his face hardening further with each line. By the time Diana was summoned, night had crept across the yard. Lanterns glowed weakly, casting shadows long and sharp. Harrison stood waiting, the letter folded in his fist. "They know." Headquarters got Kellner's report. "They're sending an emissary tomorrow. They want you brought before them for questioning." Diana didn't flinch. She only asked, "And if I refuse?" Harrison's gaze held hers. "Then they come for you anyway, and they won't be gentle." The words settled like lead. She turned her face toward the horizon, where faint starlight flickered through smoke-tinged air. For years she'd stayed ahead of her past, remaining quiet, blending with background. Now silence was no shield. Behind her, cadets moved in shadows, rebuilding damaged warehouses, whispering her name under their breath. She heard it rise and fall like a chant, uncoordinated but persistent. It struck her that no matter what she chose, the camp had already begun seeing her differently. Harrison's voice cut back through the night. "You need to decide, Walsh. Tomorrow when they arrive, you can go in chains, or you can meet them standing tall. But either way, this secret doesn't stay buried." Wind stirred ash from the blackened ground, lifting it in small spirals. Diana's eyes remained on the horizon, her jaw set. Yesterday's flames were dead, but another fire was coming, one she couldn't smother with sandbags or smoke. For the first time since arriving at Camp Ironhold, Diana understood that hiding was no longer possible. The choice now wasn't whether her past would surface, but how she would meet it when it did. Morning came heavy. The sky over Camp Ironhold was veiled in dull haze that refused to clear. Soldiers lined up on the parade ground with tighter posture than usual. Boots aligned in precise rows, eyes nervously sliding toward the road winding through the hills. Word had spread. An emissary from command was coming. No longer rumor, but certainty. Diana emerged from the barracks into this tension, her uniform clean but still carrying faint stains near the cuffs, reminders of ash that had clung to her skin just a day ago. As she crossed the yard, conversations died mid-sentence. Cadets parted instinctively, not with mockery as once before, but with silence heavy as stone. Their gazes followed her steps, seeking some clue about what she would do when outsiders arrived. Harrison waited beside the flagpole, hands clasped behind his back, his face carved with exhaustion. He hadn't slept. Diana could see it in the shadows under his eyes, but his stance was rigid, unyielding. As she approached, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "They'll try to break you quickly. They'll use authority, intimidation, maybe worse. Whatever you say will decide what happens to you and to this camp." She met his eyes, voice low but firm. "What if silence is the only thing keeping me alive?" Before he could answer, engines growled in the distance. A convoy appeared on the ridge, dark vehicles rolling in formation. Dust rose in their wake, blurring the edges of steel.